Well, for more on the evolving situation in the Middle East, I'm joined now by Professor Mark Katz, who's a Russian foreign policy expert at George Mason University. Professor, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Could you just put into context for us just how much the Kremlin had been propping up Assad's regime, and what does his fall mean for Russia's influence in the Middle East?
Well, they spent billions of dollars over many years, over 10 years, propping this guy up, and he's suddenly fallen. And I think that, what the Russians tried to advertise was, they supported their allies much more strongly than America supported its allies. But now we've seen a Russian ally fall, just very, very quickly and suddenly. And so I think that Russia's reputation will suffer in the Middle East. And I think now that they're very nervous that they're going to lose their naval and air base there on the coast of Syria.
Yeah, on those naval and air bases, they've kept them for now, but how likely is it that they could lose those strategic stations, and what will that mean for Russia?
Well, I think it's more likely than not that they will lose them. Certainly, having given Bashar al-Assad asylum in Damascus, especially in Moscow, especially after the story you just broadcast about all the pain and suffering he caused, the Syrians are going to want him back to put on trial. And I think that Putin was very foolish to have given him asylum. So that would be the very minimum, I think, that they would require. But I would imagine that the new leadership in Syria, they're not going to be willing to let Moscow keep these bases when just, as recently, I think, as December 6th, Russians were bombing them from the air base. And so they turn around and they want to keep it. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Are we likely to see Russia trying to improve relations with other countries in the Middle East over the next little while?
Well, they have pretty good relations, in fact, with virtually every country in the Middle East, including all of America's partners. So they have good relations with Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Qatar. These are, I think, sort of the main Arab governments, and I think that will continue. They'll be doing business with them, they help essentially keep the Russian war effort afloat with their various economic activities. So, and I think that will continue.
At the same time, we've also just seen Russia now moving a step closer to formally recognising the Taliban's government in Afghanistan. They would be the first in the world to do so. What do you think is the aim there?
Right. I mean, I think what's being discussed is taking them off the Russian terrorism list. But I think they are headed for recognition. And I just think that from Russia's point of view, the Taliban are in power. They're not doing anything that harms Russia in terms of the Taliban foreign policy. They don't care about what the Taliban does inside of Afghanistan. And I think that from the Russian point of view, it's better to have good relations with these people, maybe deflect the Taliban's animosity exclusively toward the West. So I just think from a practical point of view, Russia would like to have better relations with the Taliban and give them incentive not to do anything to harm Russia.
What could Afghanistan provide for Russia, do you think? Is it likely that they would then sort of be looking at trying to build bases and have a presence there?
Well, I can't imagine that. What I think is, what they're mainly concerned about is that the Taliban not support any Islamist opposition in former Soviet Central Asia. I think that they'd like to see the Taliban continue to fight against ISIS-K, their much more radical opposition inside of Afghanistan, which does have international goals. So I think it's more not so much what Russia will gain, but what it will deter the Taliban from doing.
And what do you think the future looks like for Bashar al-Assad and his family in Russia?
Well, Russia has a tradition of of playing host to its fallen allies from other countries. I think they have a little village for them. Now, the thing is, though, certainly a lot of Russian commentary is that they're blaming Assad for not doing enough to protect himself. And I think that if the Russians really hope to get hold of that base and the new Syrian government demands his return, well, they're not going to want to do that. But I would not be surprised if former President Assad suffers some very unfortunate accident near a window there in Moscow.
And all of this is happening as Russia is still grinding its war in Ukraine. Could these setbacks weaken Vladimir Putin, do you think?
Well, they sure don't strengthen him. I think that, in a certain sense, I think what Putin has done is cut his losses in Syria. That's less important than Ukraine. And so, he will, I don't think that this will hurt his efforts in Ukraine. What it will hurt, I think, if he loses those bases, is Putin's efforts to expand Russian influence in Africa. In other words, that they use that Syrian base to shuttle men and weapons to Africa. If they've lost that, they probably can still do it, but it'll be much more difficult. So I think that project is more dicey for them.